Mr Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Earlier in question time today, the Prime Minister was reflecting on some of his upbringing. One of the things he didn't discuss during that speech was the person who he named as a child and then later in life as his political hero. And that person was Sir Robert Muldoon. And this legislation that's in front of us today owes an awful lot to Sir Robert Muldoon, because it actually says, Mr Speaker, in the regulatory impact statement for the bill that the goal of this legislation is to provide greater central government direction on resource management. Greater central government direction on resource management. This is a continuation of this government's centralisation of power and taking away decision-making rights from local communities. It fits right alongside the Local Government Act changes that were before this House that centralise power. It says, as Sir Robert Muldoon would be proud, this national government knows best. It knows better than local communities about how they should look after their resources. We saw it with the Local Government Act, we've seen it with ECAM, we've seen it with decisions about transport, and here, Mr Speaker, in the Resource Management Reform Bill, we once again see a government determined to take power away from local communities and bring it back to itself. Well, Dr Smith asked me how it does that. Well, let's just have a look at that, shall we? Let's just have a look at that, shall we? Let's have a look at Clause 13 of the bill, which introduces an investment threshold. If a project or consent is above a certain investment threshold, that will be directly referred to the Environment Court. Who's going to set that? Who's going to set the regulations for that? It's ministers. Ministers will set the regulations. They'll say what the level of an investment threshold is, not going to have anything to do with a local community and what they may want. That will come directly from ministers. This investment threshold, Mr Speaker, is an interesting one because not only will it be set by regulation, by ministers, there's no attempt here to set any other kind of threshold. I don't know, in a Resource Management Act perhaps we might see a threshold of environmental impact that could be used. But no, we don't have that. We simply have an investment threshold. But, Mr Speaker, it's very interesting to look at the regulatory impact statement's comments around this proposal when they discuss the consultation on that. And this is what the regulatory impact statement says. There has been no departmental, stakeholder or public consultation on the proposals outlined in this regulatory impact statement. Most critically, there has been no consultation with the courts to ensure that there is adequate capacity to deal with an increase in direct referrals. Inadequate court capacity is a risk that would potentially mean that the proposal would not achieve its objective. Without consultation, Dr Smith, it is difficult to provide robust advice on costs, benefits and risks of these options. So the government comes to this House with a proposal that they haven't even consulted on as to whether it's a good idea. They don't know whether the courts have got the capacity to do it, and they think it's fine just to take that power away from communities. But, Mr Speaker, I want to mention the changes that Amy Adams glossed over, and these are the changes within Clause 12 that amends Section 76(4)(a), which will prevent councils from protecting groups of trees. And I find myself asking, what does the National Party have against trees? What brings them to this House to separate trees out from any other kind of natural resource and say local communities don't get to be able to control what happens there? Because no, they don't, Dr Smith, because what this does is it says to local communities, if you want to protect trees, it will be an individual tree notified in a plan. An individual tree notified in a plan. That's as good as it gets. All groups, says Dr Smith, interjecting, standing up when he shouldn't be. A group of tree actually is, in this definition, a line or a grove of trees in an adjacent area. Well, Dr Smith may or may not know, but when councils and communities are looking at the protection of trees, they're actually looking beyond a line of trees adjacent to each other or an individual tree. What they're looking at is an overall plan for the kind of trees and bush life that they want in their community. Why shouldn't councils and local communities be able to decide that a particular species of tree or a particular type of tree or trees of a certain height shouldn't be able to be protected. It's ridiculous, Mr Speaker. It will create a bureaucratic nightmare for councils, and that is deliberate, Mr Speaker, because it's deliberately designed to make it more difficult to protect trees and easier to fell trees. And that is the purpose of this. It goes directly against the Environment Court's ruling on this matter, and it once again is saying from this national government to local communities, we know better than you do about the protection of trees. We know better than you do in your local community about how to manage your resources. It is, once again, Muldernism on its way through. Mr Speaker, I also want to mention a couple of other matters where the government has done this. And one of these is in the changes around Section 32. Now, in Section 32, Mr Speaker, as it currently is in the Act, an evaluation of a council's plan has to be undertaken. Well, the government's decided now that that evaluation should focus on economic growth. That's what the government's decided. That unbalances the inherent balance within the Act for sustainable development. It takes it all away from sustainable development and says we will prioritise economic development within sustainable development. That is the purpose of the Act, sustainable development, and this fundamentally unbalances that. But once again, Mr Speaker, look at what the government's brought to the House. The regulatory impact statement tells us that the Section 32 changes under costs. It says the costs will be high because a lack of experience with cost-benefit methodology exists in councils. It then goes on to benefits, Mr Speaker, where it says the benefits would be medium, and they're not quantifiable benefits anyway. And then it goes on to say that there are high risks associated with these changes. So once again, Mr Speaker, the government comes to this House with a proposal where the costs are going to be higher, the benefits they can't even quantify, and the risks are high, and expects this House to vote for that kind of change when we don't even know if it will benefit the kinds of things that the Minister said she was interested in. Mr Speaker, there are a range of other clauses that the Labour Party has concerns about. Clause 11 of this bill amends Section 53 of the Act to allow the Minister to make changes to national policy statements without following the consultation process. Once again, one set of rules for the government and one set of rules for everybody else. Make changes because they think they know what's right, rather than in a manner that is consistent with this particular piece of legislation. Mr Speaker, the other aspects of this bill my colleagues will cover in some more detail, but one in particular are the questions around the fast-tracking process for the Auckland Unitary Plan. In principle, the Labour Party is happy to see a process where we get through the Auckland Unitary Plan in a quicker way, a more efficient way. But what is Muldoonist, Dr Smith, is that this government, the national government, is going to decide who's on the panel that hears this. The government can say, well, I've got some suggestions. We've had leaked from the National Party the memo with the 4 people who are likely to be on that panel. It's going to be chaired by Paula Rebstock, obviously. I mean, there's nobody else is there. I think Tony O'Brien's there, Peter Kiley's there, and Stephen McElroy's there. Because that's what we've come to expect from this national government, putting the cronies in place to oversee something like this. So it's all very well to say, yes, we'll fast-track this Auckland Council plan, but it's going to be controlled once again by ministers. Mr Speaker, the Labour Party understands that there is room for more efficient and effective processes within resource management. But this bill is not that, Mr Speaker. This bill is once again a power grab from this government, taking away the rights from local communities to make decisions that affect them, putting in place unbelievably silly rules around things like trees and separating them out, and once again trying to avoid the public having a fair say in all the consents that affect them. Mr Speaker, we would like to support a bill that reforms the Resource Management Act to make it more effective and more efficient. Unfortunately, we cannot support this bill because it does not do that in a way that retains community representation, in a way that gives local communities the ability to make decisions about their own resources.
I call Nikki Wagner.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. In contrast to the previous speaker,